Hey, it's Kyle here, and I'm very excited. We have a special video we're going to do today. Talk about everything from cosplay, Star Wars, Dragon Con, a little bit of everything. And I'm joined by a special guest, Stephanie. So I'm going to throw it over to her and let her introduce herself.
Hi guys, you're gonna have to pardon my dog barking in the background. My name's Stephanie, and I am an amateur cosplayer and rock climber. If you want to find my stuff, you can find it on Instagram at ClimbsAndCosplays.
Very cool. Um, so I love going to Dragon Con myself, and whenever I tell people I go to Dragon Con, one of the first things they ask is like, "Oh, do you cosplay?" Because like for a lot of people that don't know anything about Dragon Con, they're aware that cosplaying is the thing. And I always explain, no, I don't cosplay myself, but I enjoy seeing all the cosplay there. So I think I'll enjoy a chance to talking to a cosplayer and getting a little bit more of your side of what Dragon Con is like for you. Because I'm sure your experience of Dragon Con is probably a lot different from my side where I'm not cosplaying and stuff like that. So first off, like, how did you get into cosplay?
So it's kind of a roundabout situation. I actually had a friend who he's British. He like was here for 5 or so years, and he really wanted to experience all sorts of things. And he heard about Dragon Con. I never like I knew about conventions and stuff. But I'd never actually been to one. I didn't know like any big cons except for like Comic Con, and even then, I didn't really look into it. Um, and so my friend was like, "Hey guys," to our big friend group, "have you heard of Dragon Con? Would you be interested in going?" And we were like, "Well, I mean, sure, why not?" He's kind of an instigator, so he was like, "We can do like a small little con in our local city, Incredible Con, which is in Charleston, South Carolina. And then if we like it, then maybe we can go." So that was basically my first experience with cosplay. I did like I bought a cosplay and went to the little convention, kind of was like, this is great, very, very fun. And met so many cool people doing all sorts of different cosplays. Um, and so we were like, all right, Dragon Con is here we come. Yeah.
And so how long ago was your first Dragon Con then?
My first Dragon Con, I think, was 2021.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we did Incredible Con in 2019, and then COVID hit, and then when
Yeah.
they brought Dragon Con back, then we went.
So this past year would have been your first year of kind of experience, almost a full-fledged Dragon
Yeah,
Con then.
yeah. Because like last year, so this past one was my third time going. Last year was like a little bit more relaxed, and so like this year was full blown all out.
Yeah, I know there's a few people I'd met at Dragon Con the past couple of years that started coming post-COVID, and it's very much a different animal because even this year they capped attendance a little bit. So
Yeah.
last 2019 it was about 90,000, so it was even bigger. And I think they realized they got to the point where it was getting too crowded, so that's like when they
Mhm.
scaled it back. Because I think people
Yeah.
when COVID happened and they capped attendance, people was like, "Oh, we like it less crowded." It's like that's right. Maybe we need not to sell as many tickets as is humanly
Hmm.
possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I'm kind of curious since you mentioned your first cosplay was actually a costume you bought. What was your first cosplay then?
It was a character from My Hero Academia, um, Ochako Uraraka. I
Very
got the
cool.
wig. It was my first time like trying on a wig, so like even trying to put it on and figuring out what to do. I had long hair at the time, like really, really long hair too, so that was a whole situation as well, figuring that out. And then I didn't want to do her whole like superhero costume. So I just went for like the standard jacket thing, their school like gym uniform, which was still it was really fun. I think that my favorite memory from that and what I think maybe really solidified my love of doing cosplay and interacting with other cosplayers was the fact that I went as a singular like character from this show ended up meeting up with a whole bunch, like a whole group that was doing a group cosplay. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're the one we're missing. Come on and join in this photo. And we got a really fun picture. And it was just very fun. It's like really nice to see other people who are like fellow nerds and love all the things and stuff like that.
Yeah, I know that's one thing I always really enjoy about Dragon Con every year is kind of seeing because you'll be walking around and you'll see people make those connections. They walk around, they see people in similar costumes, and they start nerding out together. And
Oh yeah.
it's always a lot of fun. And that's one of the things I always explain to some of my friends who've never been to a con is like a lot of people just assume like, oh, people are just cosplaying as like Star Wars stuff or Harry Potter
Mhm.
stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, they're doing the big stuff, but then there's all these niche stuff that like I'll walk around as like I have no idea what that is, but it looks
Yeah.
cool.
Hmm.
Or there'll be some random character that I never thought I'd ever see cosplay, and you'll see it. So it's the amount of creativity in it always amazes me. Um, I guess so. 2021 was your first Dragon Con. Then
Hmm.
uh, were your cosplays at that one all ones you made at that point, or were you still doing costumes you were buying, or what was that one like?
So that one was I was very ambitious. So I did end up making I'm pretty sure I made everything. It was my first experience trying to sew, which was horrific. It was my first time working with like props or trying to make foam props, which was very, very intimidating. But that is when I found out that I actually really, really loved working with foam as a medium. But yeah, everything at that for that one was made, which was which was really cool actually because learning stuff. I have a group of friends who are also very creative people, and we all like have different skills that we could bring to the table, so we all helped each other out, which is really uh it was a really fun time.
So I think in Dragon Con 2021, if I remember correctly, they capped attendance at 45,000, if I remember correctly. Um, so, but for a lot of people, that's still a big con. I know. I remember that year. That was my first year being on panels in person. I'd went
Oh
to Dragon Con
nice.
for several years, but that was my first year being a panelist.
Uh-huh.
And I remember in a lot of those panels we were doing, people would ask like, "Oh, how many people in this room is your first Dragon Con?" And like half the people there was their first Dragon Con, and the Dragon Con veterans like, "Oh, y'all have no idea what Dragon Con's actually like." Because it's still, if you've never been to one before, it still seemed very crowded and very big.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
I mean, my first con experience prior to that was like was Incredible Con, and it was just at this small little, I mean, not small, but it was like a coliseum kind of an area, and so it was just one location over the weekend, and the number of people were really small. So going there post COVID too, and everyone's wearing the masks and
yeah.
everything, I was okay, I this is a lot.
Yeah, so that's gonna be my question.
Very
So like,
fun.
so did you find it like, so was it intimidating when you got there and you saw all those people and all the cosplays, or was you like, oh, this is awesome that it's so big, or what was your reaction?
A little bit of both. I think because it was all of our first times as well, we didn't really know what to expect. We were very much newbies. We like went on the newbie tour and all of that stuff. Um, didn't realize that you had to get in line early to
Oh
get
yeah,
your
yeah,
badges.
yeah.
And so we were like standing in line for ages, not realizing how actually big. I mean, we knew it was going to be big since it's advertised over the span of like 5 hotels, right? But like, I don't think it really occurred to me how many people were going to be there. And again, like you said, it was kind of condensed.
It's very small. Yeah, yeah. I remember that going because like to 2019 it was about 90,000, so they kept it at 50%. And you showed 2021, and it did feel like well that there's a lot of people here, but at the same time you feel like it doesn't really feel like a whole lot if that's what you were used to. I
Yeah.
remember the thing I enjoyed about like because you mentioned lines and stuff. If somebody had been through like the big ones, you felt like, oh, the lines are short. It's easier to walk around and stuff. Because I mean, there were some years when it was up to 90,000. If you, I remember a few times where I'd get in one hotel and it's like, I can't leave this hotel. It's too crowded. I'll never make it to another hotel in time. So I'm just
Yeah.
stuck here for a few hours.
that's the other thing. Like, it was my first time like understanding, oh, interact let me interact with the Dragon Con app and choose what I want, and not realizing how spread out they could potentially be, because my interests do kind of, they're quite wide. So it's like if I'm trying to get to this particular panel, not only am I trying to navigate through all the people, but now I have to find this hotel as well. And it was just so crazy. I'm really bad with directions too, so that was a whole other situation.
Yeah. I would say the first year I went, which I think I was 2013, 2014, somewhere around there, that entire first weekend, because I went by myself as well. So I wasn't with a
Mhm.
friend group or anything like that. Um, and
Brave.
I did feel like the entire time I did like feel like I was lost and I couldn't figure out how to
Yeah.
get to hotels. I think it really took me like the second year where I felt like, oh, I know I kind of have a better grip. And by like the third year, like I figured like, all right, now I kind of know where most of the stuff is. Every once in a while, there's still a room I can't figure out where it is or where the line starts at. But now I kind of figure out like I think I know my way around. But
Yeah.
it still can be overwhelming with everything that goes
Oh,
on there.
very long. Yeah.
But I always tell people if you've never been to Dragon Con before, the Dragon Con app is your friend. That's I don't know how people did it before the app because I know they still give out the paper schedule, and I look at that every time. I was like, I don't know how people did this just with the paper schedule version.
Yeah, it would be wild. I don't know. Like you, I don't know, maps.
Yeah, yeah. So on your first Dragon Con, like what were the like what costumes did you bring? Like how did you think it went in that regard for you?
So I chose, again, a kind of a range. I did, let's see, one video game character, I think. Yeah, one video game character from Kingdom Hearts. I did Shion from Kingdom Hearts 2. Um, and that was what I thought was going to be an easy sewing experience, not realizing like a big giant cloak jacket thing with a hood is not actually easy to do at all. I fought with a sewing machine quite a bit. So I did her. I did Ruby Rose from Ruby, a YouTube like show from with Rooster Teeth. Um, and I had to make this huge scythe out of foam, which was very, very fun to do. It's like my first time actually working with foam and like trying to cut everything out and figure out how they all worked together. Really loved doing that. Made a lot of mistakes. It was fine. And then another one of my hobbies is crocheting. So after I think I started the jacket thing for Shion, I was like, I don't want to sew anymore. So we were gonna go as a group costume as dragons, and I was like, I'm not sewing a dragon. No way. So I crocheted instead. I crocheted a dragon instead. Which was also very, very fun. And then the last one was Sypha Belnades from Castlevania, which was also sewing, but wasn't as bad. I had some.
And what was there any like reactions you have from that first year of people like not or I should say memories of people reacting to the costumes that year that really sticks out to you?
Yeah, so I both Ruby and Sypha, I think, it's like you said before, right? With like the really niche characters, like obviously you see the big ones, like you see your Obi-Wans and you see whoever's really popular that year. I think was Loki last year? No, Loki was last year.
Yeah, Loki. Uh,
I I can't remember, but
yeah.
then
No, I think Loki would have been was last year. Yeah, yeah. Some years it blends together.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, I think Loki was like because I'm trying to remember the hotel staff.
Yeah, like
I
I
think I,
know
I
he
think they
was.
were TVAs. I think it was Loki last year.
Yeah, so like you got the big ones, but then because I did Ruby and I did Sypha, nobody really like not I didn't have a ton of people recognize me. However, the few who did was like it's so much fun. It's like I think one of best things about Dragon Con or conventions in general is that everyone practically, like, right? Everyone is a celebrity in a way. And I don't generally love a lot of don't like to be in the limelight at all. Like, do not talk, like, do not put me on stage, you know, don't put me on a panel, gosh, like that sounds horrible. However, in cosplay, it's just a different story entirely, right? And to have people recognize your character and yell out, "Oh my gosh, Sypha!" as you're walking from place to place or something like that. It's so much fun. And obviously, me getting to find other people who were also from Castlevania. I think I saw maybe one other Ruby Rose, which was really fun too, because we like saw each other from across the area and we're like, oh my gosh, Ruby! It was very fun.
Yeah, I know one thing I've always noticed is kind of those smaller, more niche cosplays. I remember specifically, I guess this would have been 2 years ago, so probably 2021. There was a Star Wars book cosplay that I saw, and at that time it hadn't been anything other than like a book cover. And but
Hmm.
she, so if you saw her, you just saw like, oh, she's a Jedi. But like
Yeah,
some people like me saw her and like knew who she was, and so like I went up,
yeah,
oh, I love you. And I mentioned that you could tell the way her face lit up, like, oh, somebody knows who I'm actually supposed to be. And I love their reactions versus like if you're just cosplaying as like Obi-Wan, you
right.
don't have that same reaction. So it's almost
Yeah,
that
yeah,
place like, oh,
exactly.
somebody else knows who this character is that I really love. This is awesome. And
Yeah, like I think that one year in 2021, one of my friends was a character from a book. And that's the other thing that I love about Dragon Con, like the number of fandoms that are present and represented at Dragon Con is incredible. Like, this book had never been put into any sort of film, at all. So nobody really knows exactly what they are or who they're supposed to be. But when my friend got recognized, because she did a great job with it, um, it was just, I was so happy for her. She was so happy because she got recognized. It's incredible.
yeah, I mean that's the one thing. All those fandoms that are represented at Dragon Con that I really do love because I probably spend, I would say half of my time in the Star Wars section.
Sure, yeah.
Um, but I always try to make way to other stuff. But always that's one thing when I look at that Dragon Con app and you look at all the stuff and you go like, there's a puppetry track or something like that, or this little small little stuff. And every once in a while there'll be something on there that I go like that I'm a fan of. It's like, oh, I didn't know anybody else like this. Like, oh, that's the thing
Hmm.
on here. And those are the ones like I sometimes enjoy going to a panel. I remember like last year there was a panel for a very small TV show in sci-fi that I didn't really think was getting that good. And I kind of enjoyed going to that, even though there was only 10 people in the room, probably
Hmm.
more than any Star Wars panel I attended, because like, oh, you're the first people I've ever met that actually watches this show too. It's just nice to so we know like I'm not the only one.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like this year, I'm obviously a really big Star Wars fan as well, and I'm into a whole lot of other stuff. But I got to go to a Wing Chun uh like mini workshop, which is like a martial art in the Silk Road area, and I was just like, who
Yeah.
this isn't even really a fandom, It's like, who is here? And there were like plenty of people there, and we actually got to do some hands-on stuff, and it was very fun.
Yeah,
Um,
no, similar to that. Like I usually every year always try to. I'm not sure if you've ever attended these, but DragonCon has some really good science speakers who come every year. So I remember I want to say it might have been before COVID, but like there was a lady there who actually worked on Voyager, and she was actually in charge of the Voyager satellite for like 10 years.
wow.
And just like, and sometimes like I've been to a couple where you have people that work for NASA and you just sit in the room, he's like, oh, I thought I was smart. This person is like 100 times more. And just hearing about like all this stuff they think about, like, oh, I'm in charge of a satellite that's going to Mars
Hmm.
or something like that. And again,
Yeah.
that's not a fandom,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's just really cool to kind of experience that type of stuff.
I really do want to get to the science track. I haven't been able to get there yet. But it's like high on my list. I will say every year I feel like there's I'm trying to lean into the tracks a little bit more and go to more of the panels and stuff. It's just like, um, as we get older.
It's a challenge. I will say, like this year, I think I actually I probably skipped more panels this year just to take a break and just like maybe do a walk around or sit and eat than I've done in previous years.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know
um,
what it was about this year. This year felt very exhausting.
yeah, I think in a similar boat, but I mean, you talked about like you wanting to go inside. There's some tracks I've always wanted to go to. Every year I'll have
Yeah.
star on the app. It's like two, but I never make it to it. Maybe it's always in a weird hotel and it's a little bit farther away.
Hmm.
But it's one of those things. I think you could go to Dragon Con 10, 15, 20 years, and there's always going to be some part of the event you never really experience.
Yeah. Like I'm pretty sure in the app, like every single day, I've got at least 20 stars, right? Like of things that I want to do. And you maybe get to two of them.
Yeah, I usually when the app first goes, I star everything I think sounds interesting, and I'll look, and there'll be some hours where there's like 9 things starred.
I
And
know.
yeah, and then I usually try to get it down to like a couple for each hour, so that way I have some options depending on where I'm at and stuff like that. But even then, I know like there's always the stuff I missed I want to go to every year, and it's hard. And when you get into stuff, I'm sure like when you're cosplaying, that impacts what you can do with me. Like
Oh
when I'm
yeah.
on panels, there's some stuff that like because this year when I was on panels, there's a couple times like I probably should skip the thing before my panel so I have time to like collect my thoughts and go over my
Right.
notes and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And yeah, I'm sure there's probably again like some stuff that you go like, maybe I don't want to walk with my cosplay 4 hotels over or something like that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. This year I went on the side of mostly like easy to move around in cosplays, which was a little bit more convenient. But it's just you get to what you get to. But regardless of that, it's a fun time, right? So like
Yeah, yeah, it's awesome.
I'm
Yeah,
definitely not sad about anything that happened or didn't happen.
no, yeah, I'm always that's like after I went to Dragon Con a couple years, like that's the one thing I quickly realized. It's like there's no way you can do everything you want to. It's impossible. So you need to get over that, that fear of missing out and just,
Right.
have fun in the moment because you're never going to be able
Exactly.
to do everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess speaking of this year's Dragon Con, what was your did you have a favorite cosplay you did this year or one you were extra proud of?
Oh, yes, for sure. I was let's see. I think so this year I redid my Sabine Wren cosplay. Um I I think in 2021, the first Dragon Con I went to one of the Star Wars panels on droids, which
Okay.
inspired me to like think about what I could possibly do the following year in Star Wars. Then, of course, Mandalorian came out, and I was like, okay. And then I watched Rebels, and I was like, Sabine seems right up my alley, and it was going to be foam and all of that stuff, which is again I discovered that I really loved working with, and I would love to the idea of making or trying to figure out how to make her armor. So I actually was Sabine last year as well, and decided, okay, this year not only do I want to remake the armor so that it's more durable, but I want to actually sew her flight suit too, which was very intimidating. But I was very, very proud of how it turned out. And so she was a little bit, she was still definitely difficult to move around in, but better than last year for sure, primarily because the visor wasn't green.
I could see that. So I know you talk about how much work you put into it, and I have a couple other friends I know that do cosplay, and I know when I talk to them, they always talk about how many hours they put in. And I've
Yeah.
told some non-Dragon Con people like how much work that goes into it, and they're always kind of amazed. So like for a costume like the Sabine one, like how many hours would you guess you probably put into that costume?
Oh gosh. I think I actually started her in May and probably worked on her at least, I want to say at least 15 hours a week. 15, that sounds like a lot. 5 hours, well, it was a lot. It was definitely a lot. It helped. Maybe 15 is excessive. There were definitely weeks where I did put in 15 hours, like full weekends worth of work. Um, uh, but thankfully a lot of the groundwork had been done because I had actually tried to do Sabine the year before. Um, that year took, I think, significantly longer because I was still figuring out the process of what type of foam do I want to use, how precise do I have to be with the cuts, how do I even paint her armor, because it's not as simple as, right, like just making it shiny to be like cool Beskar. Like I did all of that, but also I had to figure out the painting on top of it.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, that was a lot. Fun.
So yeah, and that's the one thing everybody I always talk to that has cosplay experience, the amount of time they put into it always does kind of blow me away. Because that's the one thing about doing panels and stuff. Like all I have to do is kind of like, I was on a panel for about Mandalorian, which I believe is the one you attended.
Yeah,
Um,
that's how we kind of connected.
yeah, and I mean that is like, I submit to be on panels maybe a few months beforehand, but I don't really. You don't find out if you're going to be on a panel until 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. So you have to
Oh,
kind of start
okay.
prepping just now there, like in case you get on something. But even
Uh-huh.
that, it's just more like you just start rewatching the shows. So like I rewatched, all I probably like I think the past few years I've done a panel related to the Mandalorian every year. So like every year I just have to rewatch all the Mandalorian
Hmm.
episodes. So I've probably
Yeah,
seen
yeah.
that series now maybe 8 or 10 times a piece, just because you
Sure.
you constantly rewatch it every year for Dragon Con. So I've kind of got to now like early summer, I just start automatically rewatching Star Wars stuff just in case I get on a panel.
Sure.
Because the first year I got on a panel, like I started prepping like 2 or 3 weeks ahead because I didn't really think I was going to get selected. And you get selected, and you're like,
Oh no.
oh no, I've got on a panel. And that year, 2021 was interesting because it was still COVID times, and a lot of their
Hmm.
normal speakers weren't coming, or people were canceling at the last moment.
Sure.
So when they put out a list of panels, I just said like, oh, here's all the panels I'd like to be on, not knowing I would get selected for every single one. Um, and then that was also the year, which I haven't had since then. Like other tracks were having speakers cancel, so they would put out like emergency speaker calls. So that
Sure.
year, I did 5 Star Wars panels and 2 in alternate history. There was one day I
Wow.
had like 4 panels, and one day, and that was just way too much.
I bet that
Um,
was a different Dragon Con experience too for you.
it was very intimidating and stuff, and um, but very fun. And like I've told people, like it's you kind of see a different part of Dragon Con being on the other side of the table. And
Yeah,
if anything,
absolutely.
when I go to other panels as a fan, I kind of almost appreciate more what they're doing because I kind of have an idea of like what they did to get ready for it and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
That's like a whole other thing that I don't know if I would ever like. I know you're talking about how much effort it takes to put into cosplay and prepare and all that stuff, but man, having to prepare all the knowledge base and speaking, and like being kind of that expert, right, for a whole bunch of people is good for you.
Well, especially, and I'll say the one thing, and even doing this, now for a few years, Star Wars, maybe is even more intimidating to be on a panel for because you just know there's so many people on there that they really know their stuff. And I think that's always your fear. It's not as much when like, we're doing the presentation; it's more when it's the question and answer period. You
Oh
always feel
yeah.
like, oh, is somebody going to come up and ask about something like I don't even know what character you just referenced, and that has happened. But luckily, since it's a panelist, you just let somebody else on the table answer
Hmm.
those questions and
That's
stuff like
true.
that.
That's true.
Um, but yeah, that was definitely a concern my first years on the panel. Um, so what I guess you now you've been to 3 Dragon Cons. Do you have like a favorite memory from Dragon Con? It does have to be cosplay related. Just what to you is what the your favorite moment of your Dragon Con experience.
Um, if I had to pick out a specific moment or like types of moments. I definitely love interacting with um the the cosplayers who have interactive cosplays. Does
Oh yeah,
that make sense? Like, I think last year, what was it? I think it was like one of the Zelda like so were they like a market person or something? Like they were selling something and
yeah.
as soon as you interacted with them, they like gave you a thing or whatever. Like giving out swag, it's so much fun interacting that way. This year was really fun. I saw a guy who had just like roll a die like on the sign. And so I was like, he's just walking around. I don't know if anybody's really interacting with him. Let me go and because I'm curious, genuinely. I'm like, all right, let me go up to you and I'll roll a die. He goes, okay. So he pulls out like his box, he pulls out a D20, and like gets the little tray out and I roll and I'm not a lucky person. I rolled a nat one. And I was like, no. And he like made fun of me and in a nice way made fun of me. He was kindly heckling me and gave me this horrible candy, like the grossest candy in the world. And then my friend was like, ooh, I'll try. And she rolls and she got a nat 20. So she like got it was just so much fun, that type of stuff. um and it's just like those little interactions that I think are probably my favorite part. I think my group has talked about it already. We want to try to make sure we get some swag, so that we can give some out, and it's always really fun.
Yeah, I would say that's one thing I think it seemed to got bigger and bigger every year I've went. Like when I first started going, I don't think that was really that big of a thing, but I think that's really
Really?
picked up the past few years. But
Yeah.
yeah, I do agree on those interactive costumes are always really cool. I remember this year, I can't remember which panel it was, but I was waiting to get into a Star Wars panel, and there was a guy with a costume who had it was kind of like a dry erase board. We had in small little panels, and it just said like "draw on me," and somebody the person in front of me was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, I just like art. Here's a marker. Just draw on my costume." And so
Oh,
like
that's really
so he
cool.
again, people were just drawing. So then basically the people in line were making his cosplay whatever they wanted it to make because in reality
Yeah,
his thing was just yeah. So it was just really cool. And then probably one of my favorite ones I saw this year again is more you didn't get something but you could interact with them is from the movie Princess Bride.
oh,
The Dread Pirate Roberts, he was set up in the Marriott with a little table and basically said like, play a game of wits with me. And he had the two little
that's
bottles, just like the movie. And you could actually
yeah,
go out there and actually do your little, the little interaction, just like the movie and stuff. And like little stuff like that. It's just, it kind of takes it to another level, you know?
for sure. Yeah, I saw. I wish I'd seen it in person, but there was a little girl set up like next to a pot, I think, like a potted plant or something, and she was a Korok. And there's like the little puzzle you had to move the rock into like the right spot, and she would pop out and go,
Oh,
haha,
wow.
and like it's like so cool. Um, I wish I'd seen that one. That would have probably really made my day.
So one thing I always like to ask cosplayers, a lot of times when I'm at Dragon Con, and is do you have like a dream costume that you want to make someday? Maybe you don't. Maybe you're not sure if you're their skill wise yet to make it, or you just haven't figured out how to do it yet. But is there like one costume that you really want to do, you just haven't done yet?
Um, Gosh, I think a year ago I would have said just my own like original Jedi would have been really cool to do. But I was way more intimidated by like sewing. Um, and now that I've done Sabine's flight suit, I'm like sewing. That's not true. I'm still very much intimidated by sewing. But I don't know. I would really love to continue improving upon Sabine, honestly. Like just the amount of different skills that I could learn. Like I think next level would probably be getting into 3D printing, and maybe a little bit of electronics and stuff because there are like little bits of light and stuff
Yeah.
uh, on her armor that I never worked with any of that before. I don't know a whole lot about 3D printing. I've talked to a few other people who are doing like Mandalorians, their own Mandalorian armor that is printed, and they talk about like um how brittle the material might be versus foam, like what things could be printed or should be printed, attaching how to attach the armor properly and all of that stuff. So there's just, I think, still so much that there is to learn for me with
Yeah,
Sabine that I'm like not quite ready to move on for that. Uh that being said though, Ahsoka would be really cool. That requires body paint and
yeah,
head sculpt. And that's a whole other level too.
yeah. I know. I met up with a couple of friends at Dragon Con this year, and one had never been there before, and he was actually from Chicago, and so one day he wanted to cosplay as uh, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and he did the paint and stuff. But one thing he was
Nice.
talking about afterwards, like I didn't really factor in that like how hot a land it is, and you're not in the buildings all the time. You're walking around out sometimes. So you have to figure out like how does that impact your body paint and stuff like that.
Right,
And of course, he was in
exactly.
like a full suit too, so he's like long sleeves
Yeah.
and pants. So it's not
Was he
cool.
wearing
And
white as well? Cause
he was
like,
wearing white. Yeah,
oh no.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so one of my favorite things about Dragon Con, especially about cosplay, is all the cosplay mashups. So have you done a mashup yet, or if not, do you have any mashups you'd like to do?
I do. So actually I thought that I've decided next year I'm probably gonna do a Disney Jedi mashup.
Oh, cool.
I also for Halloween put together a fun Hey Hey costume. And one of my friends thought it would be really fun to try to do a mashup with Hey Hey. So I don't know, we'll see. Maybe it'll come out at Dragon Con next year. We'll see, maybe.
Awesome. Yeah, it's that's always one of my the amount of creativity that sometimes comes in that because sometimes you see it and it's like, oh, how did you ever come up with that idea? But now that I see
Yeah.
it, like, why did it like 100 other people think of this before you thought of it?
Yeah.
Because sometimes once you
Uh,
see it, go like, this is very obvious, but I've never seen this before.
right. No, that is another thing that I definitely love about our like whole cosplay community, right? Like there's the sheer creativity, not only for the people who are trying to do like super authentic cosplay, but also like you said, all these fun ideas and mashups. Like, oh, was it last year the guy who did like the ship that blocked the water?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Why?
yeah,
My favorite cosplay so far, and shout out to who this person was. We were in the walkway, so I couldn't stop them.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
She was literally a sprouting potato spud,
Oh, okay.
just a potato that was sprouting, and I'm like, why is this a thing? And yet it was amazing. It was one of the best cosplays I've ever seen.
Yeah, I remember probably my favorite, and this wasn't a mashup, but one I was like, oh, this was a really neat group costume. As at one point I was in the Marriott and I saw, the inflatable costumes that have become really popular, and I saw a couple of people that were in cow versions of that. And I actually grew up on a cattle farm. So I was like, oh, cow
Yeah,
costumes. I've never seen
yeah,
that before. That's really cool. I was like, I wonder what the story was behind that and didn't think anything about it. And then later, I think I was actually on a panel and somebody came in and said, like, oh, I just saw a really cool group Twister cosplay. And so like I looked it up and it's like the group. So they were the cows and somebody else had cosplay as the tornado. And then you had other people that
oh,
cosplay as actually the characters in the movie. And at some point in the Marriott, they got around and the tornado spun around. The cows and everybody else went in a circle around them and they acted out a scene from the movie. And I was
I
like,
think I did see that video. That's
yeah.
hilarious.
So again, when I saw this, like, how, like that's brilliant. How did you think of that? But also, how has nobody ever done that before? It's one of those
Right, right,
things.
right. Yeah. Like all the orcas that we saw this year. Did
Yeah.
you see all the orcas? Insane.
I saw a couple, yeah, and yeah, it's like I said, a lot of times you were talking about the ship. A lot of times you do get this stuff that's just randomly in the news. I think it was in 2021, but I remember, I think that was 2021, but it was like the Popeyes chicken sandwich uh, fad had just started. So I saw a group
Mhm.
costume of people cosplaying as the various fast food restaurants that had chicken sandwiches. So somebody was cosplay as like Chick-fil-A, somebody else was Popeyes, and everybody had signs making fun of the other ones.
Yeah.
It's like, again, who decided to fast cosplay as fast food restaurants? You know?
Right, exactly. Who does these things? And it's
Yeah.
fantastic and it's so much fun. I love it.
So I know you mentioned the convention, I guess, that got started in Charleston that you went to
Mhm.
first. Is have you went to other conventions, or is that and Dragon Con your only convention going experience?
So far, it's just those two. But gosh, I forget the names of them now. But there are a few more that I'm like, I think interested in trying to get to maybe next year or the year after. Some of the smaller ones that are a little bit more, I guess less, it's still fan, like you still get all the different fandoms and all of that stuff, but I think there's a lot of like learning involved,
Yeah,
like different panels and stuff and workshops and stuff like that that I'm really interested in doing just to like up my game, I guess. I
yeah, there
am
were.
I like always sorry, I really love learning about stuff. So I think that's one of the things that I enjoy the most about cosplay in general.
Well, that's probably why, like, I'm such a fan of going to the panels and stuff. Because sometimes when people are like, oh, "What do you mean panels? What other panels are like?" So I try to explain. Basically, says like it's like you're in college and you're just going to classes you enjoy.
Right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like tell people like, I like college. I like going to the classes, just randomly
Hmm.
learning about stuff. So it is very much a learning experience. So I briefly I spent like a half a day at Atlanta Comic Con earlier this year, which is one of those cons that's run by a company and it's really more photo op type things. And the only reason I even went to that, I had a friend who wanted to get the cast of Cobra Kai was there, and he was a big fan, and he
Wow.
wanted to get his photos taken with him, but he had never been to a con before. And he's like, "Well, you've been to
Hmm.
Dragon Con. Show me around this place." Like, what's it? It's this different event that doesn't. But he still
Yeah.
made me go with him just to kind of like be his escort and kind of explain, well, this is probably how the badge line works and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, and the thing I did there that I went to Dragon Con, 8, 9 times. I've never went into the mart. I've never been in the vendor area because I'm always so busy. I'm always afraid, like, well, if I get in line for that, I'll miss like a couple panels.
Oh yeah.
So I've
Wait,
never in that. Yeah, but
you've never been to Dragon Con's vendor hall?
never been to the vendor hall yet. So the only vendor hall, like Atlanta Comic Con, while he was in line to get his photo, I went through Atlanta Comic Con's vendor hall, and it was kind of a cool experience. I was like, oh, so this is probably like a smaller version of what Dragon Con's
Yeah.
vendor hall is.
That,
But that's definitely something I want to go to at some point. That's probably the biggest thing at Dragon Con. I would say the two big thing. I've never been to the vendor hall, and I live about 30 miles north of Atlanta. So I stay at home and I take Marta into Dragon Con every
sure.
day. But since I'm commuting back and forth, I've never stayed for like any of the late night stuff. So I've never
Mhm.
experienced like Dragon Con at dark, So that side of things. And that's a huge part of Dragon Con. So I feel like I
Yeah.
haven't really experienced that. I haven't really experienced the vendor hall. That's my two areas of uh, a blind spot for me in my Dragon Con experience.
The vendor hall is something else too. Like it's amazing, incredible. There's also the art show though too.
I went to the art show this year. It's first year I went to that, and I actually went to it by accident because I was looking for a panel in that hotel. So when I was going to, it was like somewhere on that floor, and I just couldn't figure out where it was. I was like, "Well, the art show's
Hmm.
here. I'm just going to go through the art show and check it out."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was really cool. I enjoyed it a lot. So again, I like, well, I guess this is probably like a small little taste of what the main vendor hall is, just not without the hour plus line to get in.
Yeah, yeah. We've always found that it's really nice to go on like what is it? Monday morning.
Yeah, Monday's pretty laid back for a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very chill. So like we always do our last minute perusal of the vendor hall on Monday morning. But I will say like the vendors themselves are really cool, but there's a whole like dedicated pop artist floor in the vendor hall that's incredible. Like
Awesome.
the
Yeah.
artists there are like so good. So like I always like to go to them and the artist hall, and I'll also look at the Legos. That's a thing.
Yeah. So I guess on my side of things, on being a panelist, I always kind of curious. Is there a specific memory you have of going to a panel at Dragon Con that you really enjoy? Was it like maybe seeing a big star, or was it more of a fan panel you enjoyed? What
So
was
I've
your?
never. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, what was your, kind of your big favorite panel moment?
My favorite panel moment was probably in uh 2022, so not this year, but the year before, when I went to I think it was the 501st panel.
Okay.
Um, I was Sabine that day, and wanted to know a little bit more about like the armor and stuff. And like I said, I just really love learning about stuff. And so I was asking them about how to join the 501st or the Rebel Legion. And they gave me some pretty good advice. They're like, well, a lot of people who join don't necessarily usually actually don't use foam because it's just a little bit softer. It doesn't look as hard, like real armor. And that's when I found out, so one of the other people that was at the panel, like you said, they have knowledge, right? And so he's just sitting in the back, and he like pipes up and he's like, actually, you might be able to use this thing called Epsilon that'll work with foam. I bet it would work. And it was just that level of knowledge there in just that room alone was so helpful. And it's what I used. It worked real well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Kind of similar. I remember I can't remember if it was the first year I went to Dragon Con or the second year, but have you ever been to this their Star Wars trivia contest?
Yes. Oh
All right,
my
yeah.
gosh.
So the first year I went to that, and like I'm a big Star Wars fan. It's like I probably know a good amount, and I watched that. I was like, oh, I don't. This is like, how do they know all this stuff? So that's I make a point. That's the panel I go to every year. I love going to that panel so much,
Hmm.
and I'm always blown away by what they know. And again, it's just the amount of knowledge they have. It's just
Yeah, yeah.
intimidating and breathtaking at the same time. But it's always a lot of fun.
I think I missed, so this year was the first year I actually participated in it. And like I took the test, and that was like shocking. I didn't actually get to go see the finalists
Fun, oh yeah.
compete. I wish I'd been able to, because I bet, like you said, people who know this stuff blow my mind all the time. It's crazy how much they remember. Do they
Yeah,
do they
yeah.
just have memories?
Yeah, some have just photographic memories. Others, I know they said they spend half a year studying, for it. I've
A
never
lot of
actually
content now.
yeah, I've never taken the test because the test is kind of later at night, so I'm like, I need to get back. So, but the last couple of years they've started posting it on Facebook, so you can take it afterwards. And I think
Oh,
I usually get it somewhere between 20 to 25, which is usually around the average score because the average is like 18 or 19. So I'm usually a little bit above average, but like Ike this year to make the finals, you had to get like low 30. So I'm still
oh
nowhere
my
near the
gosh.
finals.
Yeah.
Um, a few of my favorite moments ever at Dragon Con have been at that panel. I think it was 2 years, it might have been 2021. They had a category where they played an audio clip of a Star Wars language and you had to identify what species it was.
Wow.
And some would
That's
be easy because some
wild.
would play, like, oh, that's clearly Chewie. So that's just a Wookiee. But then there's other stuff you're like, I have no idea what
Like the
that
weird
is.
flex or whatever, something
Yeah.
that like, mhm.
Um, and then one year, which I knew a couple of these, but like they would name a planet and they go like, "What is the capital city of this planet?" And just like random stuff like that. And it's like some of these are like, how do you know this? And what is? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's wild.
Um, so I know we've touched a little bit on Dragon Con and the cosplay, but kind of touch a little bit on Star Wars before we wrap it
Sure.
up. So obviously, I know we've talked about Sabine a
Hmm.
lot, and she made her live action debut this year in Ahsoka, and a lot of other characters made the live action debut. As you might guess by the stuff behind me, I'm a huge Thrawn fan, so I was
Yeah.
insanely excited to see Thrawn on the live screen. So, what was your reaction to Ahsoka? How did you enjoy it?
I honestly really loved Ahsoka. There were moments where I was just like, okay, well, I guess I will suck it up about things, specifically about Sabine, but it's fine. But man, I loved how they brought in so many aspects of Clone Wars and Rebels and all of that stuff into it. I think it went really, really well. I think Filoni did a great job, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, honestly, they brought in a lot more stuff and referenced a lot more stuff than I was expecting them to, because I figured they were going
Yeah,
to simplify it a lot just to avoid trying to confuse
right.
casual fans.
And I don't think they did, right? I think they just he went in real hard, and if the people had questions, they could look it up or go back and watch Rebels or Clone Wars or ask friends who know. You know, honestly, I think he did great.
Yeah, I think sometimes stuff like that they can do better if they're just going to say, "All right, we're just going to assume you're going to put in the research to understand it," versus we're going to spoon feed you and kind of, because then you know you're going to annoy the hardcore fans, but then
Yeah.
the casual fans still might not care, so you're running that risk.
I think there was a little bit of that that was necessary, especially in like the first two episodes that were a little bit more, oh, you know, this is Jason, this is why he has abilities,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. But I don't think it took away from it at
Yeah, I
all.
think they did a fairly good job. I know I was actually talking to a friend earlier today who hasn't seen any of the animated content. It's my first chance to talk to her since Ahsoka had ended, and she
Mhm.
was saying like, "Can I talk to you about Ahsoka?" I was like, "Were you confused about something?" Because she knew I'd seen all the animated stuff, and her big thing was like, well, she didn't understand some of the emotional connection between some of the characters. So like, she's like, "Well, why was it a big deal at the end when like Hera and Ezra met? Like, did I miss something?" So I had to explain, well, this is
Yeah.
so how I explained it, because she has watched The Mandalorian, she loved The Mandalorian and all that stuff. I was like,
Mhm.
well, just imagine if you watched the Book of Boba Fett and you didn't watch The Mandalorian, and in the Book of Boba Fett, the Mandalorian and Grogu are reunited. You're still
Yeah.
gonna like you still would get it's a moment, but you wouldn't really understand why it's an important moment if you hadn't seen
Right.
all this stuff saying like these are why these two characters care about each other.
Know each other. Yeah. Yeah,
So I got
exactly.
why she understood like I think this is supposed to be a big moment, but I don't understand why. Can you explain it to me? So
Hmm.
and that's the
Hmm.
hard thing. I don't know how you get across those emotions without
Yeah.
people watching all the seasons of Rebels, or
Or like the relationship between Anakin and Ahsoka and those moments of reuniting, you know, like how would they understand that emotion there if they hadn't seen any of the Clone Wars? So I mean I get it, but at the
yeah, I
same
know
time.
it's one thing I hadn't really thought of, but one of my favorite channels, which I've had got a chance to know them at Dragon Con, is Star Wars Explained, and Alex and Molly. And at one point, one of their videos, they were talking about one of the early ones when Anakin first appeared, and they mentioned something about like, "Oh, you're my Padawan," and it's like they had to do that because casual fans don't even know he had a Padawan.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah,
Right.
like it's easy to forget about that. Like, oh yeah, a lot of people have no idea that Ahsoka exists. So you do have
Exactly.
to kind of like casually mention that, so they go like, "What? What do you mean he had a Padawan?" Or
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
and I actually forgot to mention when we were talking about the Star Wars trivia thing, my favorite fact about that trivia contest, if you ever watch Star Wars Explained, the YouTube channel, they started that YouTube channel just to study for the Dragon Con Star Wars test because he
No
needed to figure out.
way.
So he started that, and now that's morphed into that's his full time job, and maybe he has the biggest Star Wars fan channel on
Oh
YouTube.
my gosh.
And it was
I
all started just so he could study for a Dragon Con Star Wars trivia contest.
That's that's amazing. I think I might have watched a few of his stuff, and I know I've definitely actually I'm fairly certain I forwarded like some of his videos to friends who haven't seen any of the Rebels or Clone Wars so that they could had like a little bit of a
Yeah,
something to before.
they do good really intros. I think how I discovered the channel, they do really good here are some Easter eggs in the episodes, because a lot of times there's stuff I don't know. So like I'd watch it, like, was there something I missed that I didn't really get?
Yeah,
Now I'd go back,
yeah.
and so now like I watch a lot of their content. But the Easter egg videos are really good because even again, as somebody that there'd be stuff that mentioned in Ahsoka's like, oh, I didn't really know that was referenced, and
Oh, I
this is
should
a
probably
random
watch some
this
of
is a
it.
random comic books character that popped up that I had no idea who the person was or stuff like that.
Yeah, those I really do appreciate that stuff because I'm only just now getting into some of the comics, you know, so it's really nice to know, oh, if this is a little bit that I want to know more about, I can go and learn about it in the
Yeah,
comics. And it's this particular series or something like that, you know, it's pretty neat.
exactly. So with Sabine on the live action, was there anything with her costume? Did you have any like? Do you want to stick to cosplaying her version from Rebels, or are you like, oh, do I want to do the live action version, or what are your thoughts in that regard?
So, I am a little bit sad that if I want to stick with the live action, I'm gonna have to make a backplate. Because that feels difficult, you know, like I'm one person, I have to like try to model that on my own back. So I'll have to figure that out if I decide to do that. I this year's Sabine, I used the epilogue um costume. So that wasn't so bad because it was very close to the live action. The only difference was her flight suit. And considering how much work I put into that this year, if I decide to be like live action Sabine, it'll have to be in a year or more before I try to do that. So I think I'm gonna stick with epilogue Rebels Sabine for a while.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Um, so on, and we, touched on Ahsoka a little bit, but is Sabine your favorite character, or do you have somebody else that you actually enjoy more in Star Wars, but you just have decided to cosplay as Sabine, or is Sabine your favorite?
Um, I think all-time favorite has always kind of been Obi-Wan Kenobi. Um, Sabine is I do really love her character. I don't think I would cosplay her otherwise, you know, if I didn't love
Oh
who
yeah,
she was and her story and like all of the stuff that she's been through and really who she is as a person. I love her creativity. I think it's so hard because now the Star Wars world is so big, right? And
ginormous. Yeah,
it's ginormous. Like as a kid, I really loved Obi-Wan and then got really into the Solo twins, who obviously are no longer canon.
yeah.
Um, and then I think as I got older and watched the Clone Wars, I really fell in love with Ahsoka, which is why I was so excited to see her and see this series. And then I fell in love with Sabine. So I don't know if I have a specific favorite per se, but I do have like my few people that I really love.
It's funny you mentioned the Solo twins because when I was kind of coming as age as a Star Wars fan, really the only content was the books. So a lot
Hmm.
of my favorite characters were ones that were heavily in the books. So like in the books I read, like Obi-Wan wasn't really a character. So like I liked Obi-Wan from the original movies, but
Sure.
like the books, Luke, Han, Leia was still in there, Chewie
Exactly.
was still in
Yeah.
there. So I began to identify more of them. But then you do have the book characters like I love the twins.
Hmm.
You have some of the villains like Thrawn that I enjoyed a
Yeah.
lot. But a lot of those other Jedi that they introduced, there that were only book only characters kind of became some of my favorites, which is one thing I am kind of enjoying now with a lot of their new stuff that they're slowly bringing some of those characters
Hmm.
back into canon. So I think I very rarely do content on my channel that is not positive because I feel like there's enough negativity on YouTube. If I don't
Sure.
like something, I'm just not going to talk about it. One of the few
Right.
videos I ever did where I was like, it wasn't really angry, I was more sad is when Disney announced they bought Star Wars and they were ditching the canon because it was more for like, well, I've read like 80 books. And I was like,
I know.
I'm going to miss those stories. Like, I want
I
those
know.
stories.
I really love like that. I think you're right, right? Like that time period, my real connection to Star Wars started with the prequels. And then, like you said, you know, there wasn't a ton of content necessarily about those characters. They're like, I remember the little like middle school level books about Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and I loved those. I don't think any of that is canon anymore, you know,
no,
and
would it be?
yeah, but like what I had was all of the stories with Jason and Jaina and Anakin and Ben, right? And
Yeah.
their whole adventures. And that's how I identified with the original trilogy. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, time wise for me, it was kind of perfectly timed from that because like when they were doing the young Jedi stuff with the Solo twins and stuff, like they were kind of middle school age. I was in the early '90s. I was around middle school age too, so like I was reading
Mhm.
them when they were the same ages as me. But
Exactly, yeah.
I remember my sister was older than me. She showed me the Star Wars movies, and then I had basically 10 years before the prequels came out, where the
Mm,
books were all I had. Um, but I remember
yeah,
at the time I specifically even said like I understood why Disney was doing it because
I
it really
know.
hard for them to do it was really hard for them to do new content if they were beholden to everything else that's already been done, but at the
That's
same
true.
time I was sad about it, because like I'm
Yeah.
going to miss it. But I'm glad because one thing I was afraid of is all these old characters who had never been on a movie or a TV show that we're going to forget about those. I'm really glad that they have it, and they've been bringing those people
Yeah.
back in. Since you have mentioned the old books, is there a book character that you really hope they bring back into canon someday? That's possible, because obviously we know the Solo twins are not going to happen. That's
Yeah.
done. Mara
Yeah.
Jade's not going to happen.
Mara Jade is not, yeah.
Because that was my hot take last year at Dragon Con when I was on a panel predicting what would happen in Ahsoka. It's like, oh, I think they're going to bring back Mara Jade. She's not going to be connected with Luke, but they need somebody with Force powers to be able to be on the bad side against Ahsoka.
Yeah.
Um, but then that ended up being Balin and
Yeah.
Shin and stuff
But
like that.
I mean, I love them too.
Oh, I
I think,
loved him. It's great. Yeah.
yeah, Balin's a great character. But is there a book character? I don't know. Um, I guess technically, was Quinlan Voss in any of the older books?
Possibly, I cannot remember.
I can't remember,
Yeah.
but I remember the one book that I read him in. I loved him so much, and he kind of is like he's a mini character. Like
Yeah.
most
It's
people don't know who he is, but
yeah.
I was a big fan of him.
It's funny you mentioned him because I was talking about like how I start rewatching stuff to get ready for Dragon Con. So like I rewatched some of Clone Wars, get ready
Hmm.
for it, but I did get anywhere close to finishing before Dragon Con happened. So afterwards, like I'm gonna keep on watching and just do a rewatch. So literally an hour ago, I watched his episode where they
Yeah.
go find Zero the Hutt. So that's the last episode of the Clone
Yep.
Wars I just rewatched. So I just did see his episode. So yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, it would be cool to kind of see him come into the storyline at some point.
Because he's actually referenced in Obi-Wan.
Yep,
I keep forgetting, right? He's referenced in
he's
Obi-Wan.
referenced. Yeah,
So I was like, oh, he's alive.
yeah, yeah. That was a
I
big
would love to
moment when
see more of him. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I guess wrapping up and maybe a little bit, we can touch on Ahsoka a little bit more. What are your hopes for Sabine, Ahsoka, everybody else that we've seen Ahsoka for the next extension of their story? I think everybody's assuming we're going to get a season 2. They haven't really
I
announced it,
hope
but I think
so.
it
Yeah.
makes sense. I don't.
Yeah.
I have a hard time imagining they're just going to leave them there and then have the movie wrap it up. But what do
Sure.
you want to see happen with Sabine?
Um, Now that I've accepted the fact that Sabine has access to the Force
Yeah.
and is like, able to manipulate the Force, I would really love to see the relationship that forms between her and Ahsoka. Especially, I've always loved the like that dichotomy between master and apprentice. Um, it's like been a thing all the way, from Qui-Gon Jinn to Obi-Wan and Obi-Wan to Anakin and all. I've been like that type of mentorship. Um, well, I used to be a teacher, so that kind of relationship to me is like really, really important. And I think it would be really interesting to see that bond between them and how they grow and how they make it back to their galaxy.
Yeah, the one thing I hope to see, and I'm not sure how soon we'll see this since she's now in a different galaxy, but I'm really want to see her interaction with the other Mandalorians that are out there. Because one thing, that panel you attended
Mm,
on that I was a part of, is one thing I've really enjoyed that they've been doing the past couple of years is exploring the different ways you can be a Mandalorian.
yeah,
I've really been enjoying that journey of Din going through and realize like, oh, not everybody has to wear a helmet, and
sure.
Bo kind of realizing like, oh, maybe the dark saber doesn't mean as much as I thought it does, and
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
I'd like to see Sabine get thrown in there and see how that interaction would go. Would they accept her as kind of going more the Jedi way, or would they see that as kind of a betrayal? I don't think Din would, but some of the other ones might like, hey, I don't know about you becoming a Jedi, or
That's true. I didn't actually think about that. And Big Bo and Sabine have history as
yeah.
well. So that's also sad I was sad to hear about her family. That kind of sucked.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad they kind of got it out of the way, because like if they didn't mention, people were just gonna be asking like
Right, like
what was
what
going on
happened?
there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Um, so to wrap up, there was one cosplay question I forgot to
Oh,
ask. It
sure.
doesn't really have to be cosplay, but kind of cosplay slash Dragon Con related. Um, do you have any tips for somebody that maybe either interested in getting started in cosplay, and kind of
Yeah.
similar? Do you have any tips, maybe for somebody who has attended Dragon Con before? What would be your advice for either of those situations?
So tips for somebody new to Dragon Con is stay as much as you possibly can, stay in the moment. Um, Make sure you get enough food and water.
Yeah,
Lots
yeah,
of food and water. But for like seriously stay in the moment because like you said, there's just so much there that there's no way that you can get to everything specifically that you want. So that's kind of unrealistic. And despite it all, regardless of what you do, it's all very fun. Like as long as you are open to seeing the things around you or like, oh, let me see what this panel is, even though I don't know anything about it. I just walk in and see what that is. Like all of it is going to be very, very rewarding. Um, Getting into cosplay for the first time, uh, just try it. If it's something that you are interested in doing, regardless of how difficult it might look, um, try it. You're never gonna know if you're gonna take to it or be good at any of it until you try, right? Having friends around to encourage you is also a really good thing to have. But I never would have known about prop making that it was something that I loved if I hadn't just tried to make that ginormous scythe because I was very intimidated. I told my friends I don't think this is gonna happen, and they literally were just like, just start cutting it out, and it just goes from there.
yeah. It's really uh, like the stuff you see there is always really impressive, and getting to see what it does. But a lot of them, they'll talk about like, it's that first time you just, having fun, and then like, I don't know how many people I've heard say like they do a small basic one and they get hooked, and like 7, 8
Yeah,
years later they're with some super elaborate costume that, as you're talking about, like has lighting effects on it, and
yeah,
and all, 3D printing and all this other stuff that
right,
they never would have thought of a few years before. And
right,
I'm
exactly.
always interested in talking to those people. A lot of times you're like, oh, what do? You must be like into something related. It's like, no, like I'm a teacher, I'm an accountant. Their job has nothing to do with this.
Yeah,
So it's very fascinating. It's a great way to like get your creativity out there for sure.
exactly, for sure, for sure.
And I would definitely, I know Stephanie plugged her Instagram earlier. Definitely check out her costumes are very cool. I know I enjoyed getting to see them because even though I guess technically we were in the same room at Dragon Con, we didn't meet in person.
Yeah,
So
no, we didn't.
so it was neat seeing your costume there, because that's the other thing. Uh, how many times like I'll see afterwards pictures on Instagram like, oh, I wish I'd seen that, and go like, I must have just been like 30 feet away from that costume. I
Yeah,
just never saw it. So I really
yeah,
did
yeah,
enjoy seeing your pictures on Instagram. So hopefully next year maybe we'll get to meet up in person and actually say
yeah,
hello
absolutely.
face to
I'll if
face.
I'm sure you're gonna be on a panel or five, and I'll stop by and say
There
hello.
we go. I usually tell people the one advantage I have at Dragon Con, because I'm very tall, I'm 6'6", is sometimes in the hotel lobbies I can see costumes a little bit farther away than other people. But even then, especially if you're in the Marriott, it's hard to see
Yeah,
stuff.
it is
So
really hard. I don't know if you'll be able to spot me because if you're six, I'm 5'1", very small.
opposite end of the spectrums there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, Stephanie, thanks for joining me and giving me,
yeah,
so much
absolutely.
time on a evening. So I know this is your first YouTube experience. So,
It
thank
is.
you for be willing to try this and join this. I would say, like, if you enjoy doing this, this is not a whole lot different from being on a panel. So maybe think about that someday. You never know. I mean, when I started going to Dragon Con, I never would have thought of being on a panel, and then eventually go, hey, maybe it won't hurt to send an email, and then you're shocked when they say yes.
Maybe one
Yeah.
day I'll be brave enough to do that. And seriously, thank you so much for like reaching out and having me on your channel. It's been a lot of fun and definitely less stressful than I thought it would be.
Awesome. Well, glad you enjoyed it. Could you just plug your Instagram channel
Oh
or
yeah.
page name again one more time, and I'll put a link in the description as well.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's Climbs and Cosplays. because I climb and I cosplay.
And talking about stuff that is afraid to do, like I'm terrified of heights, so I would never be able to do any of the climbing stuff that you do. So,
I am also terrified of
oh,
heights.
are you?
I am. That's why I only boulder. Technically,
Very
I
good.
boulder.
Yeah, I couldn't do that stuff, so you got me beat there. But as always, thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate the support. So keep it tuned in on the channel. Thanks very much. So I'll see you the next time, and may the force be with you.